Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The courtroom was silent, but Ifeoma's heart roared with grief. The judge's final ruling landed like a thunderclap in her soul, even though she already knew what was coming. Her fingers trembled slightly as she gripped the frayed hem of her faded gown, the only black one she owned that still fit her. She refused to cry, not here, not in front of him. Chike, her husband of 9 years, sat opposite her, arms crossed, face cold, as though she were nothing more than a stranger. No emotion flickered in his eyes. No regret, no recognition of the woman who had once knelt before his sick mother, cooking with bare hands when the gas finished. No trace of the man who had once said, "Even if I have nothing, I have you." The bailiff's voice echoed. Case closed. Ifeoma rose slowly, chest heaving. She turned, eyes locked on the floor, heart begging her legs not to give out. Outside the court, the Abuja sun burned high and unforgiving. But worse than the heat was the laughter. Chike's friends stood in polished suits, smirking and joking as Ifeoma stepped out. One whispered loudly, "Na Okada Shide Teiko House?" Cha. Another laughed, "She for even Trek, SEF. That's her new level." Their mockery sliced into her ribs, but she said nothing. She walked with quiet dignity toward the rusted motorcycle parked outside the gate, the one she had begged the rider to wait with because she couldn't afford a drop. Her pride, what little remained, wanted her to keep walking, maybe even find a bus, but the naira in her purse wouldn't cover that. As she climbed onto the bike, holding tightly to her small handbag, she heard Chike's voice in the background. "Let her go," he muttered. "She's free now." The word free didn't taste sweet. It tasted like ashes. The wind hit her face hard as the bike sped down the road. But it wasn't enough to erase the sound of their laughter or the image of Chike adjusting his expensive wristwatch, as if washing his hands clean of her. Ifeoma clutched her sketch pad tightly against her chest, her only source of escape. It held not just drawings, but fragments of dreams she had once buried under laundry, cooking pots, and hospital bills for a man who had now erased her. She closed her eyes as tears rolled down her cheeks, hidden by the wind. This was not just the end of a marriage. It was the burial of a chapter where she was never seen, never heard, never valued. But what she didn't know, what the world didn't know, was that today's humiliation would one day be the headline of her triumph. She wasn't free. She was just beginning. Before the divorce, before the bike, before the shame, there was love. Or, at least, what she believed was love. Ifeoma met Chike when she was just 21, a fresh graduate with dreams of starting her own design studio. He was charming then, just a small trader in electronics who promised to build an empire with her by his side. "I don't have money now," he used to say, "but I have vision." And she believed him. With a heart full of fire, she poured herself into his world. When he needed capital to import speakers, she sold the gold chain her late father had left her. When his shop caught fire in their 3rd year, she used her inheritance from her grandmother's land to help him restart. At night, she'd return from her cleaning job, sit on the floor with him, and brainstorm names for his business while cooking noodles over a portable stove. Odogwu Electronics was her idea. He never gave her credit for that. As his business grew, so did his ego. Slowly, his gratitude shrank into expectation. Ifeoma became less of a partner and more of a shadow, always behind the scenes, invisible when he shined. She stopped sketching. She stopped dreaming. Everything became about Chike. His clothes, his meetings, his family's endless needs. His mother would call her our maid, not even hiding the sarcasm, while Chike would just chuckle. When she fell ill with typhoid one rainy season, he barely noticed. He had a business dinner. She lay on the floor of their room, shivering, whispering to God that she didn't want to die in a house she helped build but was never allowed to claim. Her friends began to drift away. "She too day humble," one of them once said. "How can someone be married and still be suffering like this?" But Ifeoma didn't complain. She thought her silence was strength. The worst part wasn't the poverty or the sleepless nights. It was the erasure. She had sewn his clothes, built his name, fought with customs agents, massaged his feet, prayed with him when they had no child after years of trying. She gave her body, her mind, her soul, but she couldn't give him a child, and in the eyes of his family, that made her disposable. She remembered how Chike once looked at her after yet another hospital scan and said, "You're the problem here. Maybe I married wrong." That was when something inside her began to crack. She started sleeping with her back to him, speaking less, praying more. She didn't know it then, but every sacrifice she made was planting a seed that would one day bloom in a place Chike would never reach. Ifeoma learned early in the marriage that Chike's family had never wanted her. They had smiled at the wedding, danced with plates of jollof rice in their hands, but behind closed doors they had mocked her small family, her average background, and the fact that her father had died without leaving lands or a big name. From the start, her mother-in-law, Madame Agatha, would say things like, "She doesn't look fertile. You know those skinny girls can't hold children well." At first, Chike defended her, but his defense was lukewarm, passive. "Mama, don't say that," before moving on to ask what was for dinner. As months turned into years without a child, the passive comments became direct attacks. "You think we are running a charity here?" his sister Onika snapped one Christmas. "Return bride price if you know you're not ready to carry our name forward." Chike just sighed, saying nothing, and Ifeoma swallowed her tears with her fufu. What hurt Ifeoma the most was the silence, the way Chike started letting the insults hang in the air without correcting them. He'd say, "They don't mean it like that," or "Don't take everything to heart," when his sister would deliberately place her own toddler on Ifeoma's lap and say, "Practice, in case you ever get lucky." Even the house help began to treat her differently, gossiping loudly while cleaning. "Madam no get power. Na only Oga get mouth for this house." Once, during a family meeting to discuss land ownership, she offered a suggestion, and Chike's uncle looked at her with disdain. "Women who can't give children shouldn't talk about land," he said. Chike said nothing. That day, Ifeoma sat in the kitchen long after everyone had left, staring at the untouched pot of soup she had made, wondering when she had become a ghost in her own home. Eventually, even Chike stopped pretending. He began sleeping outside, blaming work, coming home with strange perfumes on his shirt. When she confronted him gently one night, he yelled, "My mother was right about you. You bring nothing to this home but tears and complaints." That was the first night she cried on the bathroom floor, muffling her sobs so the neighbors wouldn't hear. But something shifted inside her too. That was also the night she found an old sketch pad she had hidden beneath her bed, one she hadn't touched in years. She wiped the dust off and began drawing by candlelight, tears dripping onto the paper. She drew a mansion, not for Chike, not for a child, not for anyone, just for herself. She didn't know it then, but that sketch was the first brick in the empire that would one day rise from her pain. It was a Tuesday morning, damp from the night's rain, when Ifeoma came home early from a design consultation that had been canceled last minute. She stepped into her own house expecting silence, but was startled by laughter, unfamiliar, feminine, and carefree. Her heart tightened. As she moved toward the bedroom, she noticed her favorite wrapper discarded on the floor, half wet and wrinkled. When she opened the door, what she saw froze her in place. A young woman no older than 26 stood in front of her vanity mirror wearing Ifeoma's satin robe, applying red lipstick like she owned the place. The woman didn't flinch at her presence. She just smirked, cocked her head, and said, "You must be the wife." Moments later, Chike walked in from the bathroom, bare-chested, a towel slung around his waist, and a cold, unbothered look in his eyes. "Her name is Lara," he said. "She's staying for now." The audacity in Chike's tone hit harder than the scene itself. Ifeoma felt like the floor had been pulled from under her. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She stood there, heart crumbling in silence, as Lara giggled and moved to sit on the edge of the bed, the same bed Ifeoma had once decorated with rose petals on their wedding anniversary, the same one where she had prayed countless nights for healing and children. "Don't make this a scene," Chike said. "Let's not act like this marriage hasn't been dead for years." And just like that, the man she had built with, sacrificed for, and prayed over had invited another woman into their sacred space and didn't even flinch. Ifeoma's legs began to shake. She picked up her wrapper, clutched it like armor, and stepped back. She didn't ask questions. There was nothing left to understand. The betrayal was complete, and it lived right under her roof. Later that night, as Lara's laughter rang through the walls, and Chike played loud music in the living room, Ifeoma sat alone in the kitchen with the lights off. The smell of smoked fish from earlier still lingered, but her stomach was empty. She had cooked for the three of them earlier, not knowing. Her hands rested on her knees, her eyes locked on nothing. It was no longer about being unloved. It was about being disrespected, discarded, desecrated. She reached for her sketch pad again. This time she didn't draw a mansion. She drew a woman. Her face bore scars, her eyes were hollow. But she stood tall, alone, proud, and barefoot. She drew until her fingers cramped, until the power went out, until she could no longer hear the music. That night something snapped in Ifeoma. Not her will, but the chain she had worn like a necklace. She knew the end was near. She just didn't know how it would come yet. The morning was quiet, the kind of eerie silence that follows a storm. Ifeoma was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, boiled yam and scrambled eggs, still trying to pretend normalcy after what she had witnessed the day before. Lara was still asleep in the guest room, or maybe not. It was hard to tell. Chike strolled into the kitchen and opened the fridge, not even sparing her a glance. "No juice?" he asked dryly. "There's water," she replied softly, not looking at him. "No juice," he muttered again, slamming the fridge shut. The tension in the room was suffocating. She could feel the wall between them thicken. She made a plate of food and placed it on the table, but when she turned to leave, his voice stopped her cold. "Do you think this is a hotel?" She turned slowly, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked. Then, without warning, his palm met her cheek with the weight of years of resentment. The slap echoed across the tiles. "You are useless," he growled. "This whole marriage has been a curse." She didn't scream. She didn't slap him back. She stood there, palm pressed to her cheek, trembling as tears brimmed in her eyes. Chike didn't wait to see the damage. He picked his keys and left, muttering curses as he stormed out. Ifeoma sank into the nearest chair, her body folding like a paper bag. Her world had gone dark, not just from the slap, but from the realization that even after everything, she had still held on, hoping, praying, begging God to fix a man who no longer saw her as human. The taste of metal lingered in her mouth, and her left eye began to swell. She stared at the food on the table. It blurred. It disappeared. All she could see now was her exit. Not a dramatic escape. Not with tears and shouting, but a quiet one that left everything broken in its place. By nightfall, she had packed 2 bags. One held her clothes. The other held her sketch pad, a worn Bible, and the last 3,000 Nigerian nairas she had. She looked around the house for the last time. The cracked ceiling, the dusty flower vase, the couch she had once saved for months to buy. It no longer felt like home. It felt like a grave. Before stepping out, she left a note on the table. It didn't say much, just "Thank you for everything. May God be with you." She didn't expect him to care. She didn't even expect him to read it. She walked out in the dead of night, down a street that didn't care who she was, her eyes swollen and lips trembling. No one knew where she was going. Not even she did. But one thing was clear. She was never coming back. Not to him. Not to this pain. And not to the woman who used to beg for crumbs of love. The next few days were the hardest Ifeoma had ever faced. She stayed with a former classmate for 2 nights, sleeping on a cold mat and pretending to be okay. On the 3rd day, she moved into a 1-room self-contained space behind a local carpenter's workshop, a room that reeked of dust and wood shavings but offered safety and silence. There was no mattress, no fan, just a window that barely opened and a tiny bathroom she shared with 2 others. Her pride was stripped raw. But what she did have was her sketch pad, her hands, and a mind trained in color, texture, and transformation. She visited an old contact at a local furniture shop and begged for work, anything. At first they laughed. "You? Chike's wife? You want to clean chairs now." But she didn't flinch. Yes, she said. Please. By the end of the week, she was polishing tables and scraping floors with her bare hands, earning 2,000 Nigerian nairas per job. The work was brutal. Each day she'd rise before dawn, tie her scarf, and carry a small bucket with soap and cloths from one house to another. Most clients didn't even look her in the eye. Some pitied her, others ignored her. One woman, a rich banker's wife, even asked if she was doing it for content. But Ifeoma didn't care. Each chair she polished, each rug she cleaned, each corner she scrubbed. She was scrubbing not just dirt, but memory. Washing off the shame. Dusting off the insults. The pain still lived inside her, yes, but it was being transformed. In the quiet of those homes, she began sketching again. Her clients noticed her attention to detail. "You have a good eye," one said. Another offered her 10,000 Nigerian nairas to help rearrange their living room decor. That was the first time Ifeoma earned money not from labor, but from design. Still, people from her past laughed. She overheard an old church member at the market whisper, "Chike's ex is now doing housegirl work." Another said, "She should have at least found another man by now." But Ifeoma smiled quietly. They didn't see what she saw. They didn't see the foundation rising beneath her feet. They didn't see the phone call she was about to receive. The one from an elderly woman named Madame Dorcas, who had heard of her work and requested a living room revamp. They didn't see how that one call would begin to stitch her broken life back together. They didn't know she wasn't building a new life for revenge, but for peace. And that peace, ironically, would soon sit on a throne none of them could have imagined. It started like any other job, just another call from another client who needed quick help cleaning up before hosting a small party. The voice on the other end of the phone was calm, elegant, but not condescending. "I was told you have an eye for space," the woman said. "Can you come tomorrow by 10 a.m.? Ifeoma agreed and arrived the next day with her scarf tied neatly, her face bare of makeup, and her cleaning kit in hand. The house took her breath away. It was a quiet mansion nestled in a cul-de-sac in Maitama, painted in soft peach, the gates tall and elegant, guarded by silence and trimmed hibiscus hedges. Inside, she was greeted by an elderly woman, maybe in her late 60s, seated in a wheelchair, but radiating quiet power. Her name was Madame Dorcas, widowed, childless, and with a stern, observant eye. "They say you're good," she said. "Let me see if that's true." Ifeoma got to work immediately. Unlike her other jobs, this was more than just wiping and dusting. The furniture was vintage but poorly arranged, the color scheme mismatched. As she cleaned, she began mentally sketching possibilities. She didn't speak until Madame Dorcas asked, "Do you only clean?" And Ifeoma, without hesitation, replied, "I redesign." Something in that answer intrigued the older woman. "Then redesign this space," she challenged. "Don't touch my bedroom or my husband's study. Every other room is yours for the week. I'll pay if I like what I see." It was the first time anyone had offered her a chance to create again, not just survive. Over the next few days, Ifeoma poured her heart into the project. She rearranged furniture, brought in budget-friendly curtains from Market, added small art pieces she made by hand, and used lighting to give the living room a warm, welcoming soul. She turned a cold house into a home, and Dorcas noticed. At the end of the week, Dorcas called her into the study. Ifeoma entered, nervously wiping her palms on her faded gown. Dorcas gestured for her to sit. "You brought life into this place," she said. "For years I've lived in a house that reminded me of loss. Now it breathes again." Then she asked a question that stunned Ifeoma. "Why are you doing this kind of work? You look like someone who had money once." Ifeoma chuckled bitterly, then quietly told her story, not in full, but enough to make Dorcas stare long and hard at her. "You remind me of someone," the widow finally said. "Someone I once lost." From that day on, Dorcas insisted Ifeoma return every Saturday, not just for work, but for lunch. And so what began as a one-week job turned into something else entirely, a bond. One that would shake the roots of Ifeoma's past and water the seeds of her future. The sun was unkind that Thursday, beating down like punishment as Ifeoma moved from one client's house to another. Her back ached from lifting wooden stools, her arms burned from scrubbing bathtub grime, and her throat had gone dry hours ago. But there was no time for water, not when she hadn't eaten since the previous evening. She had skipped dinner the night before to stretch what little rice remained in her cupboard. That morning, she had taken only water and paracetamol, her body begging for relief, her mind willing it to keep going. At her second job, she passed out momentarily while rearranging a dining table. She had crouched to lift a misplaced flower vase, and then everything around her dimmed. Her vision spun. When she opened her eyes, a young maid in the house was shaking her and shouting, "Auntie, are you okay?" She nodded weakly, too ashamed to say the truth. She hadn't eaten in nearly 30 hours. By the time she arrived at Madame Dorcas's mansion for her usual visit, she was visibly trembling. Dorcas noticed instantly. "You're shaking," she said. "Sit down." Ifeoma tried to protest, insisting she'd start work, but the older woman rolled her wheelchair closer and held her hand. "Have you eaten today?" she asked. Silence. "Yesterday." Ifeoma's lip quivered. "I'm fine," she whispered. That was all Dorcas needed to hear. She called her cook immediately. "Bring her food. Real food." And then she added, "And tell the driver to buy her a month's worth of groceries." Ifeoma broke down in tears. It wasn't the food, though her stomach growled in response. It was the kindness, the humanity, the feeling of someone seeing her. The way Dorcas reached for her shoulder and said, "Don't cry like this. You're not a beggar. You're a builder. Even stones weep before they rise." That afternoon, Ifeoma ate for the first time like someone whose body mattered. She had jollof rice with grilled chicken, ripe plantain, and fresh juice. Her body ached less. Her breath came easier. As Dorcas watched her eat, she said, "You should never feel ashamed to accept help. Pride doesn't feed the stomach." For the first time in years, Ifeoma laughed, a small, broken laugh, but it was real. Afterward, they sat together in the garden while Dorcas spoke about her late husband, her regrets, her loneliness. "My house was always filled with people, but I've never been this seen," she said. "I think you were sent here for something more." Ifeoma didn't fully understand what she meant. Not yet. But something inside her shifted that day. Not just her hunger, but her identity. She was not a mistake, not a failure, not a divorcee on a bike. She was a survivor, and survivors always find their fire again. Weeks passed and Ifeoma's bond with Madame Dorcas deepened beyond anything she had ever anticipated. They shared meals, exchanged life stories, and discussed furniture like it was fine art. But slowly, Ifeoma began to notice changes in the older woman. She was coughing more, losing weight, and her skin turned a faint shade of yellow beneath her rich cocoa tone. Dorcas avoided questions, brushing it off as age catching up. But one evening, after a quiet dinner of okra soup and semo, Dorcas called Ifeoma into her bedroom and asked her to sit at the edge of the bed. Her voice was raspy, her breaths shallow. "I have stage 4 cancer," she said softly. Ifeoma's heart broke. "How long?" she asked. Dorcas gave a weak smile. "Long enough to make peace. Short enough not to waste time." Then Dorcas said something that stunned Ifeoma to her core. "I had a daughter once," she whispered. "Her name was Amaka. She died in an accident when she was 25. You remind me of her. Not just in looks, but in spirit. She was a fighter. A builder like you." She paused, reaching into a drawer and pulling out a faded picture frame. The girl in the photo had the same almond-shaped eyes as Ifeoma, the same slender neck, the same way of folding her hands when sitting. "I've lived in this house for years, surrounded by luxury and silence. No one visits. No one cares. But you filled this place with laughter, even without trying." Tears streamed down Ifeoma's face. "I don't know why you're telling me this," she said. Dorcas smiled faintly. "Because I'm making plans. Legal ones. I don't want this house to die with me. I want it to live through someone who knows its value." That night, Ifeoma couldn't sleep. She lay on the floor of her one-room apartment, eyes wide open, heart heavy. The generosity of Dorcas terrified her, because in a world that had given her nothing, she didn't know how to receive something so big. She thought of Chike, of his mother, of all the people who said she was cursed, worthless, forgotten. And yet here she was, being seen, being remembered, being chosen by someone who owed her nothing. It wasn't about the house. It was about legacy, about healing, about being told, for the first time in years, you matter. She didn't know what Dorcas's final decision would be, but she knew something holy had happened, something that no slap, no divorce, no laughter at the back of a bike could erase. And with that knowing, she finally closed her eyes and slept, for the first time, in peace. The news came on a rainy Tuesday. Ifeoma was in the middle of repainting a client's hallway when her phone rang, a call from a law firm she didn't recognize. At first, she thought it was about a debt or a scam, but when the voice calmly said, "You've been named in the will of the late Madame Dorcas Amiti," her brush fell from her hand. Time stood still. She hadn't even known Dorcas had passed. She had been out of town for 2 weeks working back-to-back jobs and hadn't received any updates. Her heart dropped. That night, she lit a candle and wept silently in her room. She hadn't only lost a client. She had lost a friend, a mother figure, a window of healing. She attended the burial the next morning with a simple black gown and stood far in the back, while men in suits whispered around the grave. She didn't feel worthy of being closer. She had already been given too much in life by Dorcas: kindness, dignity, hope. Days later, she was called to the office of Adegbite and Company, legal partners in Garki. The building was tall and intimidating, the kind of place she used to walk past as a cleaner. She sat in a chair with shaking legs, surrounded by 2 other distant relatives of Dorcas who barely acknowledged her presence. When the lawyer began reading the will, the air in the room tightened. "To my remaining relatives I leave a stipend and family heirlooms." Then he paused, looked up, and said, "To Miss Ifeoma Okoye, my cleaner, designer, and daughter by spirit, I leave my house at Plot 16B, all its contents, and a trust fund to maintain it. I leave this not for charity, but because she earned it with grace, creativity, and loyalty. She reminded me of life when death had almost taken me." The room went dead silent. One of the relatives gasped. Another banged the table and shouted, "This must be a lie." But the lawyer remained calm. "It's legally documented and signed, witnessed, certified. The house is now hers." That day, Ifeoma didn't go home immediately. She walked the streets of Garki in a daze, heart pounding, tears falling quietly down her face. People walked past her without knowing the storm raging inside. In her mind, she could hear the voices of her past. "You are worthless. You brought nothing to this family. You should be grateful anyone married you." But Dorcas had silenced them all from the grave. Not with revenge, not with noise, but with legacy. She had chosen Ifeoma not as a favor, but as a reward. The next day, Ifeoma visited the house. She stood in front of the tall gates, took a deep breath, and pressed her palm against the iron. It no longer felt like a stranger's home. It felt like destiny's receipt. She knew people would talk. In fact, rumors were already flying. Some said she used charms. Others said she must have stolen something. But Ifeoma didn't care anymore. She had buried shame. Now she was preparing to rise. It had been 5 months since Dorcas's death. 5 months since Ifeoma moved into the mansion she once cleaned. 5 months of silence, of reflection, of transformation. In that time, she had reinvented herself slowly and deliberately. She didn't rush. She didn't announce anything on social media or pose for cameras. Instead, she took time to repair her soul in the house. She fixed broken floorboards, painted the walls with soft tones that whispered elegance, and added her own furniture pieces, each one handcrafted with love. She enrolled in an online interior design course, and with the help of Dorcas's trust fund, she began consulting for luxury clients. No one knew where she had come from, but they knew what they saw: a brilliant designer with taste, grace, and poise. By the time she bought a sleek black SUV with her business's earnings, she was no longer the girl who had once walked barefoot in shame. She was Ifeoma Okoye, Silent Phoenix. The SUV was what caught their attention. She had driven it to a charity event hosted by a local women's empowerment NGO. The invitation had been sent by someone who admired her growing online portfolio of design work. She arrived in a fitted dark green gown, simple gold earrings, and black kitten heels. Her natural hair was packed in a soft puff, and her presence turned heads, not because she was flashy, but because she carried a peace that made noise in its stillness. In one corner of the event, Chike stood beside his new wife, Ioma, sipping wine and laughing loudly, until his laughter froze mid-air. His eyes locked on the woman stepping out of the black SUV. At first, he squinted, unsure. "Is that Ifeoma?" Ioma frowned. "Who?" He said nothing. Ifeoma walked in like she belonged there, because she did. Not as someone's ex-wife, not as someone's past, but as a woman who owned her own future. Chike couldn't take his eyes off her. He barely heard the speaker's voice over the buzzing in his ears. Ioma, sensing his distraction, followed his gaze and muttered, "Wait, that's your ex? I thought you said she was struggling." He couldn't answer. How could he? The last time he saw her, she was sobbing behind a curtain, leaving with nothing but a bag and a folded wrapper. Now, she was stepping out of a luxury SUV, speaking fluently with dignitaries, exchanging cards with potential collaborators, her presence subtle yet commanding. Chike's throat dried. His ego twisted. That evening, Ifeoma walked past them. She saw him. He saw her. Their eyes met, but she looked away first, not out of weakness, but because he was no longer worth looking at. That single glance destroyed him more than any insult could. And deep inside, he knew. She had become something he would never again deserve. The whispers started slowly, like wind rustling through dry leaves. At first, they came in hushed tones at salons and roadside markets. "Did you hear about Ifeoma?" one woman would say. "I heard she inherited Madame Dorcas's mansion," another would respond. Some shook their heads in disbelief. "Is it not the same Ifeoma that Chike divorced? The one that used to take Okada from court?" Others added, "She must have done something. Oh, nobody gets that kind of favor without charms or sleeping with someone." But amidst all the rumors, one truth stood tall. People were noticing her. Not just her wealth, but her grace. She didn't flaunt it. She didn't post about her pain or clap back at anyone. She simply lived. She designed homes. She helped women. She showed up when she needed to. And that quiet power made her unforgettable. Her former neighbors, the ones who once mocked her for doing housegirl work, now paused when they saw her car pass by. Some waved awkwardly. Others sent messages to her on Instagram, hoping she wouldn't remember how they laughed when she fainted from hunger. Even her ex-church members tried to reconnect. "Sister Ifeoma, we miss you in fellowship," one deaconess said, conveniently forgetting how she once told Ifeoma that her womb was probably closed due to sin. But Ifeoma smiled at all of them, not because she forgot, but because she had outgrown the need to prove anything. Her silence became her sword, and her success, her sermon. The very people who used to whisper behind her back were now whispering her name with admiration. Some even renamed her story, from Okada to owner. She didn't correct them. Let them talk. The ones most shaken, however, were Chike's family. His mother, Madame Agatha, almost choked on her tea when she overheard at a wedding that Ifeoma now owned the mansion her son once tried to bid on. "You're lying," she spat. But the evidence was clear. Photos were circulating. Ifeoma's name had been listed as one of the keynote speakers at a recent women's panel in partnership with a real estate firm. And then it became clear. Her name was appearing everywhere that mattered. Her brand, Ifeoma Interiors, had quietly landed 3 major contracts in the city. Chike sisters, once so loud, now avoided her name entirely. Their silence was loud. Their jealousy even louder. The city had turned. And Ifeoma? She hadn't said a word. But every step she took echoed with the truth. She was no longer the woman they had buried in laughter. She was the storm they never saw coming. When Ifeoma returned to the mansion, her mansion, after months of legal confirmation and emotional healing, it felt like entering a sacred space. But this time, she wasn't arriving as a guest, nor as a cleaner or quiet friend. She arrived as the legal owner, the soul entrusted with a home once filled with shadows. The gates opened slowly as her car eased in, and for a long while she remained in the driver's seat, staring up at the building that had once been her sanctuary in disguise. Every corner of the house held a memory, some joyful, some painful, but all of them hers now. She stepped out of the car in soft flats and a flowing white blouse, holding a small keyring in her hand. The security guard, a man named Musa, who had once barely greeted her during her cleaner days, now bowed deeply. "Welcome, madam," he said. And it hit her, not because he used the word, but because this time she had truly earned it. Inside, the house was still in pristine condition, exactly as she had left it after the final redesign. But this visit was different. She walked through the room slowly, brushing her fingers along the edges of the dining table, running her hand across the cool marble countertop, her footsteps echoing in the wide corridors. In the main living room, sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting gold streaks across the furniture she once cleaned with her own hands. As she reached the hallway that led to Madame Dorcas's old bedroom, Ifeoma paused. A heaviness settled in her chest. The door remained closed. She knelt in front of it, not to pray, but to say thank you. "You gave me more than a house," she whispered. "You gave me the chance to believe in myself again." Her tears fell silently, but they were not of sorrow. They were of reverence, of healing, of power returned. After rising to her feet, Ifeoma walked out into the garden. The hibiscus hedges she had trimmed with Dorcas were blooming. A butterfly floated past her, as if affirming everything she felt. That evening, she sat on the back porch with a glass of zobo, barefoot, watching the sky shift from orange to purple. She thought of how she once begged Chike to let her decorate just one room in their house, and how he had laughed at her, calling it a woman's dream. Now, she had a whole estate at her fingertips. She hadn't posted about it, hadn't called anyone from her past. There was no announcement, no watch me now energy. Just peace. Quiet, humming peace. And in that moment, Ifeoma realized something profound. She didn't need to be seen to be powerful. Her existence alone, her resilience, was its own kind of revolution. And this home? It was no longer Dorcas's. It was hers. Not because she inherited it, but because she had become it. The invitation came in a gold-trimmed envelope, delivered by courier, with Ifeoma's name written in cursive. At first, she thought it was another client proposal. But when she opened it and saw the names, her hand froze. Chike and Ioma, celebrating 1 year of love and legacy. Dress code, elegance and royalty. The gall of it, the sheer boldness. She nearly laughed. It wasn't an ordinary invitation. It was a show, one designed to flaunt wealth, to parade the new bride, and maybe, just maybe, to provoke the old one. But Ifeoma didn't burn the card. She didn't scream or cry. She laid it on the table and stared at it all evening. Something in her chest shifted, not from pain, but from clarity. She had no reason to go. She had no business stepping into that room. But she would, not to prove a point, not to be petty, but to walk into the room with the silence of a storm and let her presence say what words never could. The day of the party arrived. Ifeoma dressed carefully, choosing a sleek black gown that hugged her frame in all the right places, simple, timeless, and bold. Her hair was swept into a low, elegant bun, and her jewelry was minimal, just gold hoops and a single bracelet. She didn't wear bright colors. She didn't carry a loud purse. She walked into the venue like smoke, calm, graceful, impossible to ignore. The hall was a large rented event center decorated in gold and ivory, loud with laughter and dancing. As she stepped in, conversations paused. Heads turned. Someone whispered, "Is that Ifeoma?" And from across the room, Chike saw her. His mouth opened slightly. He hadn't expected her to come. Ioma, standing beside him in a red dress that sparkled like fire, followed his gaze and tensed. She came. Chike swallowed hard. I don't know why. Ifeoma didn't flinch. She walked in and greeted the event host. She mingled briefly with 1 or 2 acquaintances who now greeted her with nervous warmth. Then she found a table by the window and sat, sipping juice and observing. She didn't need to parade herself. She didn't need to force attention. It found her. Adora, in all her pride, walked by with forced laughter and eyes sharp like daggers. Ifeoma smiled faintly but said nothing. She didn't need to. She had already won. And Chike? He kept stealing glances, his hands sweaty, his pride faltering. He had brought the world to see his new beginning, only for it to be overshadowed by the grace of the woman he left behind. Ifeoma left before the party ended. She didn't take pictures. She didn't greet the bride. But her absence, after her presence, was louder than thunder. And everyone knew it, especially Chike. It happened over dinner, at a long table filled with wealthy couples, business owners, and real estate moguls. People Chike had worked years to impress. The conversation had drifted into property investments, with one man boasting about a mansion he almost purchased in Maitama, but lost the bid to an anonymous woman. Chike, smug and itching for validation, leaned forward. Was it the one on plot 16B? The man nodded. Yes. Someone outbid me, with full cash up front. I heard it was a widow's inheritance. Adora laughed loudly. Oh, that old house? Pfft, we almost had it too. But some house girl inherited it, I think. The table chuckled politely. Ifeoma, seated 2 seats away, said nothing. She reached into her sleek handbag, pulled out a document, and placed it gently on the glass table. That house, she said calmly. It's mine. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Adora froze mid-laugh. Chike's wine glass slipped slightly in his hand. Excuse me, the host asked. Ifeoma smiled and slid the laminated ownership copy forward. Plot 16B. Fully transferred under Madame Dorcas of Meady's will. I own the house. And the land. Her tone was not boastful. It was matter-of-fact, almost too casual for the weight of the moment. I didn't mean to interrupt, she added. Just wanted to clarify before the myths start growing wings. Someone at the table muttered, My God. Another whispered, That's the girl they said took Okada from court? Chike said nothing. His lips were pale. Adora reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. For the first time, the entire room looked at Ifeoma not as a guest, but as a revelation. A woman who had walked through fire and come out gold. She didn't stay for dessert. She packed her clutch, stood slowly, and said, Thank you for the evening. As she walked away, the room remained quiet, their silence a standing ovation for the woman they had underestimated. Outside, the air was cooler. Her driver opened the SUV door for her. Inside the car, she finally exhaled, her eyes moist, not from sadness, but from release. That moment had not been planned. She didn't go there to humiliate anyone. She simply refused to let lies grow where truth already bloomed. Chike sat at the table long after she left, his mind spinning. His new wife avoided his eyes. The man who once laughed as she rode off on a bike had just watched her ride away in power. And this time, he knew, she would never look back. Chike had always prided himself on being untouchable. Ever since he rose from selling electronics in the back of a dusty with shop to managing his own dealership and property investments, he believed he had escaped the trenches forever. But after Ifeoma's shocking revelation at the dinner, something inside him cracked. He began to unravel, not physically at first, but emotionally, mentally. His confidence dipped. Business meetings no longer had the same air of authority. Clients who once praised him now brought up Ifeoma's name with admiration and subtle comparison. You know, she just signed a contract with that luxury estate firm in Asakoro, one client had casually remarked. Chike forced a smile, but his heart clenched. His new wife, Adora, once loud and confident, now began questioning him in private. Why didn't you ever tell me she was this powerful? She asked. He had no answer. The truth? He never imagined she'd rise after him. He thought she would break. Instead, he was the one shattering. It didn't take long for the pressure to show in his business. He missed a major payment on a property loan because he had invested blindly in a risky forex venture, trying to keep up with appearances. The market turned. He lost 14 million Nigerian nairas in 1 week. Then his biggest supplier pulled out of a contract, citing reputation risk. after seeing Ifeoma featured in a national magazine as a rising voice in sustainable design. His competitors were quietly circling, watching his empire wobble. Adora, who once bragged about their social circle, now began attending events without him, claiming she needed space. At home, they fought constantly. She accused him of being obsessed with his ex. "You keep talking about her in your sleep," she shouted one night. "You're jealous because she has what you could never give her: respect." That slap cut deeper than any Ifeoma ever endured, and he couldn't even deny it. He had married Adora to prove a point. Now, the point was collapsing. One night, after drinking too much, Chike sat alone in the living room, staring at an empty wine glass. The TV played on, but he heard nothing. In his mind, he kept replaying the moment Ifeoma laid the property documents on the table. So calm, so composed. That single moment had undone every lie he ever told about her. "She was never the problem," he muttered. "I was." And that was the real tragedy. He hadn't just lost a good woman. He had mocked her, rejected her, laughed at her dignity. And now, the world that once bowed before him was beginning to look away. Slowly, silently, Chike was becoming what he feared most: irrelevant. And, in the dark corners of his mind, he began to realize that maybe this wasn't just karma. Maybe it was justice, long overdue, and dressed in the elegance of the woman he once threw away. While Chike was falling, Ifeoma was rising, but not with noise or vengeance. Her growth was quiet, thoughtful, and built on purpose. With a trust fund left behind by Madame Dorcas and the earnings from her growing design business, she launched the Dorcas Bloom Foundation, a women-centered initiative focused on training single mothers and abandoned wives in interior design, basic carpentry, and home management. The idea wasn't to create a charity, it was to build legacies. Her first cohort included 12 women, many of whom had been domestic workers, abandoned by partners, or simply forgotten by society. She met them every Saturday in a repurposed hall behind her mansion, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, not as their benefactor, but as their sister in survival. "We don't need pity," she told them. "We need power. And power begins with self-worth." Word of the foundation spread like wildfire. What made it special wasn't the money, it was the healing. Local media picked up her story. They called her the Phoenix of Maitama. She was featured on a lifestyle talk show, where she told her story, not in detail, but enough to send a clear message. "Pain can break you," she said on air, "or it can build you. I chose to let mine build me." Women across the country reached out, asking for mentorship, guidance, even therapy. Ifeoma partnered with psychologists, female lawyers, and small business mentors to give her foundation structure. She started offering mini-grants to women who completed her design course and showed vision. Within 6 months, 5 of her trainees had already opened their own micro-design studios. And Ifeoma didn't do it for recognition. She never signed her name loudly on any banner. When asked why she worked so hard for others, her answer was simple: "Because someone saw me when I was invisible. Now I see others." At the heart of it all was gratitude. Every week, she lit a small candle in front of Dorcas's old bedroom and whispered, "I hope you're watching." Her home became not just a symbol of inheritance, but of healing. Visitors came and left inspired. The same gatekeeper who once ignored her now proudly opened the gates, calling her Madame Ifeoma the Builder. She smiled every time. Her past still lived inside her, but it no longer controlled her. Chike's name came up from time to time. Someone would mention he was struggling or that his wife was seen with another man, but Ifeoma never reacted. She didn't need to. She had rewritten her narrative completely. She was no longer the woman they threw out. She was the one building doors for others to walk through. And with every blueprint she drew, every life she touched, she buried the memory of her suffering and replaced it with legacy. It was a quiet Saturday morning when the doorbell rang at the mansion. Ifeoma had just finished hosting her foundation's weekend session and was relaxing on the back porch with a book when Musa, the gatekeeper, came to announce that she had a visitor. "A man," he said cautiously. "He says he's your ex-husband." Ifeoma didn't flinch. She placed the book gently on the table, wiped her hands with a napkin, and nodded. Let him in. She didn't feel fear. She didn't feel anger. Just curiosity. When Chike walked in through the hallway, he looked like a shadow of the man she once knew. His once crisp haircut had grown uneven. His shirt, though ironed, hung loose on a shrinking frame. He carried no arrogance this time. No false bravado. Just silence and shame. Ifeoma, he said quietly. You look beautiful. She smiled politely. Thank you, Chike. Please sit. For a long moment, they said nothing. The room felt heavy with unspoken words. Then he spoke, voice thick. I just came to say I'm sorry. For everything. For what I did. For what I said. I was a fool. Ifeoma looked at him. Not with hate, not with pity, but with a kind of calm that only comes after surviving fire. You didn't just hurt me, Chike, she said gently. You erased me. You watched them insult me. You laughed when I left with nothing. You chose shame over love. And that broke something in me I'll never recover. Chike lowered his head, eyes misty. I don't expect forgiveness. I miss who I was when I was with you. You made me better. She nodded. But you didn't protect what made you better. Silence again. Then he whispered, Can we start over? And her response came softly, almost tender. Chike, I'm not angry anymore. I don't hate you. But I'll never be yours again. He sat back, stunned. Not because she rejected him, but because of how gently she did it. There was no drama. No insults. Just truth. The kind that lingers longer than a slap. Ifeoma stood. Would you like a glass of water? She asked. He declined. She walked him to the door, each step quiet but firm. At the entrance, he turned one last time. I hope you're happy, he said. She smiled, not with her lips, but with her entire being. I am, she replied. And that's what you never expected, isn't it? Chike walked out of the house like a man waking from a long nightmare. And Ifeoma? She went back to her book, picked it up, and continued reading, as if the ghost of her past hadn't just come to visit and found no room left in her future. The news spread like wildfire through the elite circles of Abuja. Chike's house in Gwarinpa was up for auction. At first, people thought it was a mistake. After all, wasn't he the man who used to boast about owning 3 properties, 2 luxury cars, and a list of high-profile clients? But as rumors turned to confirmations and documents started surfacing online, the truth was undeniable. His bank had called in a major debt, one he failed to pay off after months of bounce checks and failed deals. He tried to hide it from Adora, but she had already begun packing. You're a sinking ship, she spat at him one night before slamming the bedroom door and leaving to stay with a friend. Left alone in a house that had turned cold and hollow, Chike stared at the walls and wondered how a man who once laughed at a woman riding a bike had now lost everything. Piece by piece, silence by silence. The night of the auction arrived with more spectators than bidders. The atmosphere was tense, almost ceremonial. Ifeoma didn't attend, but one of her foundation board members did. Ngozi, a once homeless single mother whom Ifeoma had helped train and fund to start her own mini-firm. Ngozi had dressed sharply in a cream-colored suit and walked into the auction room with quiet confidence. When the property bidding started, Chike's heart raced. He sat in the corner with his lawyer, praying for a miracle. But when Ngozi raised her hand and offered full payment up front, Nigerian naira 70 million in cash transfer, Chike blinked in disbelief. He hadn't seen her before. When the sale was finalized, she walked past him and said gently, Tell your ex-wife that her kindness is building kingdoms now. And with that, the deal was sealed. The same man who once mocked a woman for not being valuable enough had now watched someone she empowered by the last piece of his pride. Chike returned to the now-sold house that evening to pack what little remained. The furniture was being cataloged for buyers, his luxury car was repossessed, and even his suits, tailored in Italy, hung like relics of a man who used to matter. As he sat on the staircase in the dark, he wept, not for the money, but for the realization that he had burned bridges he never imagined he'd need again. In his rise, he had thrown stones. In his fall, he found none of those hands reaching out. Adora blocked him. His friends stopped taking his calls. His family, once proud, now mumbled that he had let success get to his head. And Ifeoma? She never gloated, never said a word. Her silence was a mirror, and in it he saw the reflection of a man who had everything but never learned how to hold love. And now love had moved on, taken form, and purchased a future right out from under him. The sun rose slowly over Maitama, casting warm light across the mansion's courtyard as Ifeoma stepped out onto the balcony, barefoot and wrapped in a soft silk robe. A gentle breeze played with the edges of her hair as she looked out at the city she once feared. This morning felt different, calmer, final, almost poetic. Below her, the staff tended to the garden, while a soft gospel song played from a small speaker near the kitchen. She stood still, sipping from a ceramic mug as memories flooded her, of that courtroom exit, of the mocking laughter, of the rumbling Okada beneath her legs as she rode away with nothing but a bag and a bruised heart. But now, in this moment, she smiled, not out of pride or pettiness, but out of peace. The world had watched her fall, but none of them knew she would rise by building, not breaking, by giving, not grabbing, and by healing, not hating. Later that day, Ifeoma welcomed a group of teenage girls from a local shelter to tour her design studio. She showed them blueprints, swatches, and mood boards. One girl asked shyly, "Auntie, did someone give you all this?" Ifeoma crouched beside her and said softly, "No one gave it to me. Life tried to take it, but I built it back, one room, one rug, one dream at a time." The girls beamed with admiration. To them, she wasn't just a success story. She was proof. Proof that heartbreak wasn't the end. That women who are laughed at can become legends. That healing doesn't always look like revenge. It sometimes looks like a foundation, a school, a legacy. That evening, as the girls left with gifts and small design kits, Ifeoma stood by the gate and waved. Across the road, a car passed slowly. She saw a familiar figure in the passenger seat, Chike. Their eyes met for a second. This time, he looked away first. That night, Ifeoma sat at her desk, lighting a candle in front of Dorcas's framed portrait. "You planted this," she whispered, "and I watered it with every tear I once hid." She looked around her study, filled with books, sketches, and awards she never chased. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a woman trying to prove her worth. She felt like a woman who had become her worth. Outside, the moon shone high, casting silver light on the house that was once someone else's and now fully hers. She walked to the window and whispered, "They laughed, but I bought their laughter." Then she closed her eyes, not with pain, not with rage, but with rest. And as the night deepened, so did her legacy. Not because she had conquered anyone, but because she had finally come home to herself. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.